and it's been really fun to get all of the great ideas, see the diverse backgrounds, and kind of debate things back and forth. And this is such a dynamic area, social media, and really how we do it effectively, that hopefully tonight we'll get some discussion too. I put together an extensive slide deck of pulling things from kind of my lectures so far. It's probably more than we'll be able to go through tonight, but you'll have that material. You'll have my contact information at the end. So if there's any questions or things you want to ask about that I don't get a chance to go over, feel free to drop me a line. So with that, I'm going to turn off my video, and you can look at beautiful scenery instead of watching me. Also, feel free to, I'll try and keep an eye on chat and answer questions or discuss things as they come up. I really want this to be interactive because that's really what social media is all about. And the course that I'm teaching is based on web and social media analytics, but it takes so much more planning and strategic use of those before we really even get into the how do you measure this. And one of our mantras we've been using throughout the semester is really we want to measure what matters. We just don't want to go after numbers. And the whole core of social media effectiveness, the goal is to increase your social capital. And especially with libraries, I think we are in such a really critical role in our communities. We don't realize how much good social capital we already have built. And with us getting into social media, we already have a positive influence and kind of a positive reputation, which is so different than the vast majority of businesses and organizations and government and other bodies that may create a social presence. So I think we really want to capture that and take advantage of our good standing in the community and leverage it for the good. So building social capital is kind of the math or the formula that you want to always be working on and keep in mind when you engage your audience. And it's really built on three core kind of gears that are working together. You have to be transparent, you have to be engaging and listening to others, and people have to trust you. And if any one of those kind of gets off kilter, your social capital is not going to build in a positive way. And I'd like to talk about, maybe, are my slides advancing, by the way? Give me a thumbs up, somebody. I want to make sure. Okay, good. I like to look at the math of building social capital kind of as additive math. So if we think of how do we gradually build things in kind of a risk-free environment, but in a positive direction, we want to add. Every transaction that we engage in a social media, we want it to be a positive result. What can happen, though, is sometimes we have meteoric actions, and that's almost like the multiplication and division side effects of social media math. And we can think of that in both a positive and a negative way, but I would say that any of those multiplication division type social capital actions are really difficult to gain control over. So let's take an example and look at one that was a social capital black eye, and that was the GoDaddy safari hunt. I don't know if any of you remember this from probably a couple years ago now, but the CEO of GoDaddy, posted on social media his safari hunt and killing of the elephant. And people were outraged. And they took quite a hit initially with domain registration, since that's their business. But GoDaddy's business has really been built kind of on the edginess, so it didn't hurt their brand or their reputation long term. And the lesson we can learn from that is because they are offering a service for a fee. So you can't, when things are very cheap, people are much more forgiving. We kind of, the principles quickly die down. But in our situation, if we're looking at the services that libraries provide, for the most part, you can't get cheaper than free. So people are not going to come back to us if, you know, it's not a financial transaction that they're kind of weighing. So we have to be careful of that. There are certainly some other like meteoric positive examples, and I can think of the one with the young man. He was a graphics design student in Singapore, and he was the one who, when Steve Jobs stepped down as CEO, he created kind of that iconic apple with Steve Jobs' image in it, and he released it to a few people at the time, but it didn't catch on at all. But when Steve Jobs died, that image kind of became the logo, the identity of Stephen Jobs' death. And this young man was just bombarded with opportunities for commercializing, for you know, creating products. People wanted to license. He wasn't prepared for that. So he basically just wanted to do good design, and while it was positive that he got recognized for it, it still was very difficult for him to manage because he was just a design student wanting to complete his work and you know, do design without really looking at making one singular point in his career. So those are examples of very hard to manage, you know, multiplication and division of social media capital. But we can also look at managing it in a more controlled manner. And I think there are some really good examples out there. If you just look at social partnerships, the Queens Library in New York, they're giving, you know, a discount for if you go to Applebee's. So again, they're partnering with a local restaurant. It's probably on a night where the restaurant doesn't get a lot of, you know, as many people as they would like. And 10% of all of the receipts are going to go to the library. So it's kind of a win-win. Cross-promotion, those kinds of things can really grow the social capital. There are also a lot of really good examples, but one that I thought was just extremely poignant was the Chardon Public Library and how they dealt with the crisis with the shooting at a school. And in the slide notes, you'll see a lot of links to their blog and to other information, and you can really see how they managed it so well. They acknowledged the tragedy. They became the center for community, and actually for press throughout the nation were coming to this website for information. But they also knew they had to grieve and they had to get on with the business of building the community back. And they just did it in a very artful, caring way. So it's a really good lesson, and I would suggest looking at that as a key for planning kind of those times of crisis that you really can't be prepared for, but there are good models to follow if you know that they're out there. So what we want to really think about is that social really is about the relationship and about the connection. It's not as much about the message, although the message will either fall flat or resonate with those people we're related to. So the connections are key. And these two graphics are just very symbolic of how critical the networks are. The one on the left is kind of showing the Twitter connections during the Egyptian, the Arab Spring. And that was actually tweets about Mubarak and how they were generating and moving through a network. The one on the right is just one of several images that is created by Eric Fisher, and he loads these onto Flickr. And this particular series that he's done, he's using the APIs of both Flickr and Twitter. and he's geocoding those to see where are people tweeting and where are people taking photos. And it's really kind of interesting. If you look at this, you'll see that we have kind of areas like big metropolitan areas almost look white. If we look, on the east and west coast, you can see that the white is really blue and red on top of each other. But blues represent tweets and reds represent Flickr photos. And there really is a difference. He has some also of Europe and other places, and you can almost pinpoint areas that are scenic because they have a lot of photos. You can pinpoint areas where there might be a lot of news, or urban areas because they tend to have more of the Twitter activity going on. So the network is extremely key, and one of the differences about this data that we now have to analyze, Facebook was the first company to do it, but now Facebook, Google, and LinkedIn, instead of having kind of relational databases, they are storing all of the information in graphs. So everything is based on nodes and edges between those nodes. So if we're looking at things like affinity networks, those are called bipartite networks, where you have, maybe you have your people on one side and then you have the clubs or the organizations that they connect to on another. And those connections then show that everything is tied together really by the relationships and not so much by the people themselves. So it's very interesting in that these connections could be shared activities. Maybe we're all participating in this event tonight. So if we were to draw a network diagram of what we're all sharing tonight, we would all be individual nodes, but we would also have a shared collaborate session. And each one of our links to that collaborate session would be our attendance. And then later we might have people that watch it in an archive. So those relationships may be stronger if we're in the room together. We may form a bond versus if somebody comes in and looks at it at the archive. So this data is huge and out there to be analyzed. But it tells us different things than what we're typically used to working with in structured databases with multiple variables. One of the kind of seminal studies in networking, which has informed and driven all of this, it's really a subset of graph theory, is the strength of weak ties. And Mark Granovetter in the early 1970s did studies about newly employed people or people who had changed jobs to try and find out, how did you get that job? How did you find out about it? And while the assumption is that we generally have tighter ties and gather more information from people close to us, there are some information, ties that are more critical in things like sharing information that may be unique. Now when you think about it, if you had a tight circle of friends and they all knew that you were looking for a job, you may not hear about a new job because you're all sharing the same information. But if you have a weak tie to someone who has information in a totally different network or environment, that is new information that's going to come to you. So those tend to be weak ties that have very cohesive actions associated with them. And I like to give this example of a real life situation. My daughter graduated from college a little over a year ago. And it was a month before graduation. She's starting to panic because she has no job, and horror of all horrors, she may have to move back home. So my daughter is the smiley face in the front, and Her dad is the parent, and one of his coworkers who he rarely sees, somebody he worked with years ago, they ran into each other in the coffee room, and she asked him, "So what's Lauren doing after graduation?" And Scott said, "Well, she's looking for a job right now," and explained, that she was a Russian major, foreign affairs, what she was looking for. The coworker said, "My niece just started working for a government contractor in Arlington, Virginia. Let me send her email." She sent email to her niece introducing Lauren, and the niece connected Lauren with a coworker. Within 2 weeks, she was hired. She had to go to DC for the interviews, got hired. That is just so typical of the strength of weak ties. It happens by accident. It is the network that is powerful. And being able to use that network effectively is how we get our messages out. And one of the key learning point of that is too often we measure how many fans or followers we have. We don't have any idea, and it's very hard to quantify who heard about our special event that we're doing on genealogy because one of our Twitter followers heard somebody talking in the grocery store line and passed on the information. It is just viral, and we can't measure that reach. We have to do it through anecdotal storytelling. So it's really important to save that information. One of the fun statistics that I just like to introduce to get people thinking, and it does relate a lot to Facebook and the number of friends and things we have, is that about 20 years ago, a British anthropologist calculated, based on different species, how big their brain was, how large their social circles were. And based on the neocortex measurements of the human brain, the estimate, just done through, computational analysis, is that we can handle about 150 friends. Or 150, I shouldn't say friends, 150 social relationships. Now think of how we're using Facebook, LinkedIn, and other things. Many people have far more than 150. It's not saying that social networks are allowing us to expand that number. More realistically, what social networks are allowing us to do is better manage those 150 most influential at any one time. So think of your own behavior and how you work in your social circles. There's times when you're closer to some people than others. One of the great just informative tools, and I'd encourage any of you that are interested in this to just experiment with it. Again, on the slide deck, I've got links to the tool. This tool is called Jeffy. And Jeffy is a network analyzation tool that will read in your Facebook data. And you can download that data through one of the Facebook apps. You then can analyze and diagram what your social network looks like. So this was mine, a couple of months ago, where I just downloaded the data and modeled it. And clearly you can see that there are pockets of people that overlap. And a lot of them have to do with different workplaces I've been, college, this little blue, I always forget how to do this pointer thing. Let me try here. Now you guys can see, right? This little blue area is my high school friends. I predict I'm way older than all of you, so not all of my high school friends are connected to Facebook. So this is college, more graduate school. These are the library profession that I work with that kind of are split in two groups. So which one do you think is my family? It's this pink one up here. Yeah, and what this isn't so interesting in and of itself. I mean, nobody's connected in my family to my work, which makes sense, and that's usually how you can tell where your family is, because they don't have as close a ties to other social networks that you may have or circles. But if I were to zoom this in, I actually found out a whole lot about my family just by this picture. And it's really fun. What I found out is that our big connector, this big one in the center, is my mom. But what's funny about that is my mom is an only child, and she's the connector for my dad's family. And some of them aren't as tightly connected to each other, but they're all connected to her. So I think it does say a lot, and you will see those patterns, and it's just really fascinating to learn. You can do the same thing with your work and your professional networks to see who's the connector that's so critical to getting our message out. So one of the things that struck me so oddly when I first started talking about strategic social media, and I was working with some library directors, and they said, well, I don't really see why you have to plan. You just do it. And I think more than any other technology area, it requires really careful and deliberate planning. And you need a strategy. So one of the strategies is, you need to define your target audience. Well, first, set your goals. What do you want to do with social media? It is not a strategy to jump on the bandwagon. Just because everybody else is on Facebook or Twitter or Flickr or Pinterest, et cetera, doesn't mean that's right for your organization. So you want specific goals. It's better to do things really well in one or two social channels than to spread yourself so thin across several. So then you define your target audience and experiment with some of those social media platforms. Once you know who you want to reach, you have to find out, well, what are they using? Because we want to be where they're at. And we have to have people that are going to be able to create content, manage the resource, look at how it's working. So we need to track the metrics and record things, keep a history of what's working, and evaluate, is this particular social channel doing what we wanted to when we established our goals? Is it more problematic than helpful? And constantly adjusting tools, strategy, and staff. So it's just like everything else, it's never done. But the core of this, and this I would argue is the most strategic thing you can do for your organization. Document your accounts and who has access to them. It is so easy to create a social media account, and they are out of control almost as quickly as you start creating accounts. So if you're, whether it's in your HR, your accounting office, administration, whatever, have some control mechanism for being the gatekeepers of knowing who's accessing which tools. And make sure people, as they come and go, get access to what they need and are restricted when they're no longer part of the team. There's been a lot of horror stories of social media hijacked, and it's easy to do if you have no idea who's the owner of the account. Yes, you can spend hours resetting things and trying to get ownership back. So careful planning doesn't take a lot of planning, but it does take some. And it's important that the messaging is on target and effective. And you look at kind of 4 dimensions. The content is key, but so is the audience and the timing, as well as the location. The location of where you're going to send these messages out is going to be success or failure depending on which audience demographic is using that particular tool, and you may have to tweak your message differently for those different platforms. So you just kind of think of that as a grid and build kind of I suggest that to really be effective in this and to make it easier to manage, you start with a weekly categorization grid. And you look at the key things that you want to cover. They may be help, they may be announcements, they may be sharing community information, they may be answering questions, direct questions, and target a good mix of all of those messages and have them kind of pre-edited. They can be created in a spreadsheet or in a Word file, knowing what time and date you want to post those. And of course, you're going to add things based on what's happening at that point in time. If there's breaking news or if there's something of critical nature of importance to your community, you don't have to strictly stick to that categorization of your message plan, but it sure is nice to have that editorial calendar. So mix it up. And this, I love this thought. This comes from Mari Smith in Facebook Marketing an Hour a Day. And she kind of challenges us to think about opportunity lies in the first place people log in every day. And it doesn't have to always be login, but think of the first place people go to for information. It used to be the radio or the newspaper or the TV. It may be, you know, getting your phone messages. But so often now it's turning to your Twitter feed or your Facebook page. So if people are doing that first thing in the morning, that means we want to have something of interest for them to see when they do that. And in those other critical points throughout the day. So again, there's infinite recipes, and it's so dependent on your organization. There are some tools that you can kind of use to see if it's worth jumping on the bandwagon. Google Trends. If you go to google.com/trends, you can use Google to help you kind of do a pulse point on, should I be thinking about Instagram or Pinterest or Flickr or Facebook? These work in doing a trends kind of report in Google because they are catchy and unique names. A lot of social media, they're choosing names that are unique and created names, so it works. It's not going to work if the social media of tomorrow is called landscape. You know, doing a Google Trends on landscape is not going to be as effective as one of these unique words. But it does tell you, what's happening with this. Try it with a particular, like Pinterest, and you can see like how it just, you know, we had this major jump in the summer. And now it's trailing down a little, but you can see what's trending and what might be worth taking a look at. So I'm going to, jump on one of these meme bandwagons given our political climate of the 5-point plan. And I suggest that we think of our social media strategy as segmenting 5 kind of categories of social media. Probably the biggest bang for your buck is going to be the mainstream. Where are the masses? And the masses are in Facebook, Twitter, and growing Google+. Mainly Google+ for its link into other resources, but Google+ is Google's social strategy, so I think it's good to be there. Then there's the multimedia and the visual content that you can kind of include in your mainstream, but it's still a platform in and of itself too, and that includes the YouTubes, Pinterest, Flickr, Instagram. What most would say about small businesses and organizations, large companies, their bread and butter is in their own content. So the blog area is very important. Now I would suggest that if your organization, your library is blogging, you certainly want to highlight and feature that content in all of these social media channels. The reality that I've seen in the real world is that many of us don't have the staff resources to be blogging. I think that's one of the reasons Tumblr has become so popular, is because Tumblr is more kind of image-driven and short, not considered long posts so much as maybe in Blogger and WordPress and BuddyPress, some of those other communities of content blogging. We also have professional networks, LinkedIn, and we have location-based. Two location-based examples are Yelp and Foursquare. So we'll look at some of these a little bit in the time we've got. I include this slide because I just really think it's accurate. Jeff Jarvis from Buzz Magazine said, "Twitter is becoming the canary in the news coal mine." And it really is. If you want breaking news, if you want trending thoughts, Twitter is the place to be. So I think we do need to be using Twitter. Whether we need to be tweeting all the time is debatable, but we need to use it as a listening device. It is the essential industry listening tool for kind of social. Google Plus, again, it has not gained in popularity as quickly as people thought it would, but it's important because it is tied into all things social that Google is working on. And Google is working on kind of implementing their search algorithm to take into account social circles. And the social circles of Google Plus, I don't know how many of you are using Google Plus. Raise your hand if you are. Okay, I find Google Plus to be so much more intuitive in terms of these circles and the whole knowledge of social connections that we talked about a little bit earlier. Facebook is kind of awkward in that. It takes a lot to manage Facebook friends list. I think. I struggle with it personally. I never know if I've got it right. I never know if my privacy is set the way I want. But in Google, it's far more intuitive. Facebook has made changes based on Google's model, but I think we're going to see them tweaking and fine-tuning that even more. An interesting exercise to go through that really will help, I think, in so many of your organization's project planning is developing these use case scenarios. And it's kind of storytelling through what someone is doing. I'm not sure I get that comment, but if I could be like Charles Barkley, I would want that. But the use case, Christina Wadke calls it playing Barbies, and I love that. This is what my Barbie and Kens looked like back in the day. And my dog would take the Barbie heads and pull them off and shake her head by holding their hair. So my dog would torture Barbies when I was a kid. It was not a happy place. But that would not be a use case scenario you would want, beheading your female use case persona. But you get the idea. You want to set up, what is this person's life like? Do I have, as one of my use case scenarios, someone who is often in a hurry and they want to connect to the library and get information on our programs. They want to quickly access their account detail. They want to renew books, etc. If you know their behavior and what their life pattern is like, you know what times it's going to be best to reach them and what social media channels they're using. I like to use AARP as an example for several reasons. This is one of the largest growing Facebook populations, is the senior demographic. But what Facebook does what AARP does so effectively on Facebook is they know what people are in their demographic are interested in and are talking about. And that's what they are talking about. They're also giving a lot of tutorials and help guides on how to effectively use these new technologies. So if you're looking for good training on social media, believe it or not, I would recommend AARP. Go to AARP as a resource to kind of get ideas for training. And I've tracked them a little bit over time just to see how this group is reaching out and gaining followership. And you see that based on fans and followers, if we look at Facebook and Twitter, in April of 2011, they had 28,000 Facebook fans and 12,000 Twitter fans. So there wasn't a huge difference between those two. Facebook was twice as big. Look at what has happened in the a year and a half since that. They have far more Facebook fans. That's because Facebook is more of an engaging, interactive mechanism, whereas Twitter is more of a news information. So you're going to use them differently, and their strategies can blend together quite well. One word of caution, because so many of us have our professional and our personal lives are kind of now all messy and intertwined, and it's becoming virtually impossible to separate them. I would say that in the future we have to realize that they can't be separated. So we have to be cautious, especially when we manage our online personas, knowing that there's kind of that gray area where things are going to merge together. And I caution that anything you say in Twitter, it's public knowledge. With the way Twitter works and the API, everything can be captured that you put on Twitter. So keep that in mind. That's a place where you really can't manage access very well unless you make it totally private. And even with that, those messages can still be archived through the API. And again, don't just target, listen. Listen, where are the people, and know that the message, it's going to flow through your communities from one to the other. And this is why, and Library of Congress is archiving everything from Twitter. It also kind of brings up, as we kind of create our local history archives, how important is it to be archiving our own libraries' Twitter tweets and things. And just as a side note to that, there are now tools available that will allow you to capture those automatically. There's a tool called IFTTT, if this then that, which connects all kinds of different social channels. And I use if this then that to take my Twitter, my Facebook posts, and put them into Evernote folders. And then I have my Evernote as kind of my archive. And you can do it to Dropbox and other things to create an archive. So those are really some good things to think about. There's an article written by Kate Crawford called Following You, Disciplines of Listening in Social Media, and I think it is such a great article. Listening is so important, and 90% of an online community only participates as listeners. And it's hard to measure the impact of people that are listening to us. They aren't silent, but they don't leave as many footprints. They used to be called lurkers, which was really kind of an antisocial stigma, but it's not that way at all. Listeners are so critical to community building because they're our checks, they're our balance, and they're who sends our message onward to others as well. When you start working strategically with your social media too, you can measure the impact of your visual cues on your websites through Google Analytics. A lot of places are using Google Analytics, and I just pulled an example up here of the Skokie Public Library. They have a lot of social media icons. It's really on every one of their header pages, and embedded within that code, if I show you this next slide, it's HTML, but you see that they have the Google Analytics, and they're tracking an event called Media Partners, and it's coming from the opening page, and it's the blogs. And here it is, Facebook. So for each one of those icons, they are triggering what's known as a trackable event within Google Analytics. And then when they look at their Google Analytics, they can see what are people clicking on when they go to our website. Well, interesting, for this time slice, their Media Partners is the third most popular thing on their website. First, it's the catalog, Check My Account. Those are our mission critical applications in library land. And then it's Media Partners. If we break that down a little bit further, we can see from what part of our website did they come from. And we see that a lot came from the opening page header, but we had about a third as many coming from the header icons on subsequent pages, and then we also have some coming from the sidebar menu. So by having those trackable events, you can start to measure what's most effective as far as placement, and it's almost like the same type of analysis they do for ads. Where is an ad most effective? And so these were kind of the three areas where these come from. And you can then, of course, do all of your graphics and really show that to administration in a visual way so that people know exactly what the impact is of putting things. And we see that while the home page placement is critical, it's not sufficient, because 1/3 of all of our clicks to social media are not coming from the home page. They're coming elsewhere. So I just like, I love this Dilbert comic. Social analytics is not just quantifiable. Okay, I love this. I have the ability to quantify the unquantifiable. That is why they call me Dogbert the quantifier. Who calls you that? 8 people. What does that tell you? Nothing. So statistics in and of themselves are not the be-all, end-all, especially for social. But there are some really interesting tools that are emerging, and one that I think tells a story, and I'm not quite sure what the story is, but I encourage you to experiment with it and see. Twitter Stream Graph will take concepts and words and show how their continuous stream in your Twitter account is established. And this is the Twitter Stream Graph for New York Public Library. And you see that NYPL is kind of one of the streams. It's mentioned in a lot of their tweets. those libraries, those live, join. You get a sense for what they're talking about. If I look at their next stream graph, though, and this is, I think, just a really effective way. This is their tag, Espanol. And what you see is that they do have a continuous stream, meaning that they are constantly and on a regular basis tweeting something and following it with the hashtag Espanol. So that makes it very easy for people, Spanish speakers, to follow that particular hashtag of the New York Public Library. But it still embeds it within their entire stream instead of having two separate Twitter accounts. I think it's just a really strategic way to do things. And then if I track, if you look at the top, just using New York Public Library's account with their tag programs, I think this is a very typical stream graph. It's kind of spurty. They are spitting out program information periodically. And it gets a lot of impact, but then it dies down. Impact dies down. Okay, it doesn't kind of move through, repeat. It's not repeated as much as maybe a topic is, and that makes sense because it's a point in time. A lot of other tools. I'll show you two more. One is Crowd Booster, and Crowd Booster is very effective if you have a large audience. My Crowd Booster kind of is in the upper right-hand corner, and I get at most, maybe two. I guess this one I had 1,400 impressions. That's how many accounts saw my message. And I can hover over that little bubble and see, well, what was the message that so many people repeated? And the way these impressions work is if my tweet is retweeted, then everybody who is a follower of that person who retweeted it also gets an impression. So it's very exponential in how the message can just grow. So it's very helpful because it visualizes which messages are making the most impact. And you may be able to kind of garner some idea of, when we ask questions, do we get more engagement, more retweeting, what's popular? And just another really fun one that I want you to try is called Tweetsite. It's a linguistics analysis. And what's fun with Tweetsite is you can take anyone's Twitter feed, their handle, and you can type it in. So you can compare exactly what all of these different linguistic analysis is on a fellow library or an organization very similar to yours. And I think it's very telling that using this linguistic analysis, the New York Public Library talks about learning 199% more than comparable or than other Twitter accounts. So that's really exciting. The last thing I want to touch on and how important it is to what we're doing is the geomapping, kind of combining location, activity, and time, and bringing that together in things like Foursquare, in Yelp reviews, other things. One of the very telling graphics here, and again I'd encourage you to look at this one in a little bit more detail, is how integrated all of this information is to multiple service providers. Meaning that when we're using a smartphone, our footprint of where we've been and who we've interacted with on an application and a data and a provider point of view is shared by very many sources. So it's very hard to kind of keep that buttonholed. And I kind of call that both the fascinating and the creepy. And this is a really good research project called Open Paths that you may want to just experiment with to see, what is being tracked regarding me. And this is my Open Paths track. It's an app that I loaded to my iPhone. I enabled Open Paths to collect this data. Now they are upfront and saying, they're collecting this data as an experiment. So I gave them permission to do that. The fact that they're able to do that, though, kind of illustrates to you how important those usage agreements are, because you may be giving up a lot of information. And I've zeroed in kind of on this, on the right side. You can actually see the colors represent time of day, and you can follow my path of walking the dog. So it's fascinating and creepy. I think you would agree. So one of the really critical things that you should do for your organization is claim directory listings. And I've got some resources of how you can do that, but just search Google Places, Facebook Places, Foursquare, Yelp. Is your listing owned by your library or your organization? If not, get it claimed, because people are talking about you there. It's a great source of information, a great place where you can provide additional information about your organization. So look. So I guess the story is social media is really trying to figure out what's your lava lamp. And that seems like a really odd question, but it relates back to a story of my daughter when she was in, I don't know, maybe 4th, 5th grade. Prior to that, she had had encounters with the library. She was a very shy child, and I would say her encounters were not always positive. She felt intimidated by the mean librarians. So she didn't want to go to the library. Much as I encouraged, she just would not go. Until, I think it was 5th grade, the summer reading grand prize winner would get a lava lamp. Well, she wanted that lava lamp, and it was the lava lamp that got her to be a dedicated library patron. So think of that story. What's our lava lamp, and how do we bring people to our library by reaching out to them and hitting those points that are really going to resonate with them? So with that, I talked a little more than probably I should have. So let's discuss any questions or comments you might have. Any questions? Anybody?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, Rosalinda, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for the great presentation. I was just wondering about, for your Library 287 class?
I'm not hearing anybody. Do I have to turn my talk off? Turn that off.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I was wondering about the Library 287 class that you have for social analytics, and I noticed that you have a Facebook page for the class. I was just wondering how that's being used in the class and what kind of experiment you're doing with it. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, I can't hear for some reason. I tested my volume and everything, so I'm not sure what's going on in the audio wizard. But our Facebook page we set up initially to try to see what kind of network we could build. And while we wanted to test a lot more things, it's, I think, just the busy nature of everything else going on and all of the different technologies that we were experimenting with and articles we were reading, we didn't develop a strategy. And we have as one of our discussion threads, what should be our strategy for the Facebook page, and we don't have one. So we have violated my first rule of social media strategy. So what we're going to do is analyze the graph and see how people are connected. And we're also doing that through kind of a pre and a later survey of our class to kind of see how we were linked initially and how over the course of a semester those links have changed. Any other comments or questions? I still want to get my hearing working here. Yeah, Jennifer, I think that is a really great question or comment. And I think more than anything, I think libraries are the weak ties in our community. More so than we can utilize weak ties, I think that we are just the bridge to so many different groups and communities and people. And being that connector is such a powerful place to be. I kind of think we're the glue that keeps the network together. Okay, what libraries should be doing in relation to places and claiming them. One thing, a quick experiment you can run is go to Yelp. Let me type that in. It's yelp.com. And do a search for your organization, your library, whatever it is. When you find that, look through kind of the detailed listing of it, and it will say somewhere on there either update or it will more likely say, is this your business? Claim it. So there are different kind of places where you can claim these resources. You know what, I could try, let me try and do a quick share if we have time. Do we have time to do that? Okay, let me do an app share. And okay, it's not picking up. Hang on. There it is. Now I see Firefox. Nope. Okay. All right, so I'm sharing hopefully my Firefox window. You guys see it? Okay. You do see it, right? Let me head over to Yelp. And I'm going to do a search for my public library, Riverside Public Library. It knows my location, so I don't even need to put that in. And when I come to Riverside Public Library, I see that people are talking about my library. It's got 5 stars, so that's great. So I go to the library, and I can get the map. I can read all of these reviews about it. I can find out what people are saying about my library. This middle part says edit business info. You can attempt to edit the business info, but it will not be accepted unless it can be verified. If it says work here, unlock this business page, this is what you want to do. And the way Yelp and Foursquare and Google Places and any of these directory listings that have a location hook into them, they work by tying that phone number to a pin. So if I were to click on this and say, yes, I work here, unlock this business page, that phone number that's displayed will be dialed and they will send a pin. And then I can unlock it by typing in the pin. Unfortunately, what happens to so many places that kind of have a switchboard as your primary phone number, if somebody isn't there to intercept that number, they're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. What I have found to be effective is to go in and edit the business info and put a person's name and email reference in there that uses your library domain, and with a note that you are trying to claim the space for the library and that the main number is a switchboard. It usually works. Sometimes they will also mail through a postcard, and then you can go in and unlock it. So it's a little bit of a logistical kind of annoyance, but it's not hard, and perseverance in these directory listings always wins and pay great dividends. So hopefully that made sense. Okay, can you all still hear me? Okay, so I'm not seeing where I can close this now, so I'm just going to go ahead and come back to my Collaborate full screen and stop my sharing. And I'll head back to the slides and just kind of show you, reiterating that same scenario but with Facebook Places. If in Facebook I did a search for my public library, I would see that my public library has a page, but it also has a place with a picture of it, and then it's got this weird thing that shows my public library but in a different town. So that's really odd. So what I did was I then looked at that extraneous place to try and figure out, well, what is this? And I see that it comes up as a local business, and there's a tab here, or a button I should say, Know the Owner. So if I worked at the library, I would click on that, Know the Owner, and I would send an email saying, you know, maybe you want to claim this place. Well, the way you have to clean things up in Facebook is you have to constantly be finding those extraneous sites, claiming them, removing them, or merging them in with your existing place. If any of you are working in a large library system that has a lot of branch libraries, this is a very tedious but really helpful exercise to go through. Now the next question is, how did all these extraneous kind of garbage places get put in? It really isn't maliciously. It's through the Facebook smartphone app. So you see I've got a little picture of the smartphone here, and what people are doing is they're adding something in Facebook, a comment, status, update, whatever, and it asks, do you want to add your place? If your geolocation is turned on your smartphone, and then you can just add the place and say, oh, that was my public library. So it's good. Maybe I dropped off my books Okay, I was driving, said, oh, I forgot to check in at the library, or I kept a message, just dropped off my overdue book, sorry. And then I decide, oh, I'll add the place so people know I was at the library. Unfortunately, I'm 2 blocks down the road and I'm no longer even in the same city. So it's not malicious, but it's kind of how Facebook rolled out their places, and it's made for a whole lot of garbage data. Okay, if there aren't any other questions or things you want to discuss, I'll part with this slide, which I think are kind of fun regarding check-ins and badges, Explorer badges. Well, thank you all. I wish I could hear you. I don't know what has happened to my volume, but hopefully I will get to talk to you some in the future, and you know, look forward to any questions you send my way. Thanks.